thank everyone for coming this afternoon. I'd like to first respectfully acknowledge the communities and nations on whose land we gather today, the Lekwungen, Songhees, Esquimalt, and Masonic peoples. It's really been an honor to share this body of work with so many over the past 3 weekends, and I've really appreciated the questions. They're good questions that made me think, and the comments. And this afternoon, I would just like to share a little bit about the process of thinking that went into this installation, and then invite your thoughts and questions to be part of the conversation. Also, while I'm talking, if a question arises, don't be shy, ask the question, because sometimes if you don't seize that moment, at least I know, if I don't seize that moment, it's gone and I'll forget what that important question was later on. So, again, welcome. It's been said that adversity introduces us to ourselves, and this exhibition, Safety Within, contemplates how individuals and community find sanctuary during challenging times. Where do we go when we're faced with adversity? Can introspection promote resilience? How do we find comfort within ourselves and in the companionship of others, whether they're near or distant from us? The activist and writer Arundhati Roy views the pandemic as a portal or a gateway from one world into another. An opportunity for humanity to break with the past, to imagine the world anew. She maintains that by bringing the world to a halt, the pandemic has offered us a chance to rethink the everyday and to move forward rather than longing for a return to what was once normal. Her words, written on the wall of my studio, were inspirational and offered a lot of hope during the months of social distancing and lockdown over the past 3 years. I was reminded of those words every time I made this up. Whether I was working or just thinking, I was reminded that I needed to focus on those words. So when artists allow themselves to play with materials in the studio, just as writers play with words on paper, it's often when there's no expectation of outcome that really interesting and unexpected and beautiful things can happen. Young children are naturally inclined to play, create, discover with joy and abandon, rarely considering what might happen. They just allow it to unfold. These drawings weren't intended to be for an exhibition. They started with small sketches of a figure in a tiny journal. Something just for fun while I was actually working on 2 other serious bodies of work, sculptural in nature. When I took breaks from these sculptural pieces, I returned to sketching the little figures. The figures that you see around me, in this sort of posture of repose and contemplation and quiet, wanted to grow. So from the small sketches, they then grew onto these panels of vellum and tracing paper. So I went back and forth while working on these other 2 sculptural bodies of work, because these offered me a lot of fun and freedom to play. And it was liberating. The figure, as it came to repeat itself on the walls of my studio, soon outgrew the studio, and there was no longer space on the walls. So with the help of a good partner in life, we suspended cables in my studio, and they then started to hang. So they were wallpapering the walls around me. They were sometimes hanging, and people would come in and find it either cramped or kind of cozy. As each one of these figures came into being, I thought of people most important in my life. Family, friends, colleagues, all of us alone, but together alone. As we navigated our way through confusing and uncertain times. Sorry. I've done this a million times. I've talked to people a million times.
It was a very emotional time. It was a very emotional time.
It was, thanks.
Yeah.
None of the figures are really complete, but I don't think we were complete. Maybe not now. The positive thing about this is as the figures kind of took on their own energy, clustered together, they became a community. They surrounded one another with their energy, their quiet energy. And they became a comfort also, I think, for people who came into the studio and just sat and they said, this looks kind of interesting. They should be lonely, but they don't feel lonely. And it's kind of nice being in this space. Screen time for work and learning soon became a mind-numbing, although at first it was an instrument to bring us together. The technology, FaceTime, Zoom, connected us across distances, giving us opportunities to see one another, albeit in a weird way, yet still connect, to celebrate those things in life most important, birthdays, holidays, special occasions, with the hope that one day our bubbles would expand, then burst, and we'd regain the freedom that we had been missing. To travel. We learned how difficult it is to be patient. Maybe we learned some humility, considering the challenges of others on the planet, also struggling at the same time. The screen time, learning time, online time became mind-numbing. And a lot of people found comfort in discovering, rediscovering tactile experiences away from screens. Repetitive tasks created endeavors. Even those who never thought of themselves as makers, creators, or artists started to make bread. They learned to knit, play an instrument, maybe try a hand at sketching or painting. Without gyms and recreational centers available, people found comfort in the everyday, in the repetitive nature of walking, running, pedaling, maybe even just slowing down to appreciate the rhythm of the waves on a lapping beach, the motion of a rocking chair. Life is like an onion. Sometimes you peel back the layers and you weep. A good friend and colleague, Rita Irwin from UBC. To touch and to be touched, such a comforting thing in life, yet for many individuals, not possible many times over the last 3 years. Applying the charcoal and the graphite powder and the linseed oil onto these surfaces of vellum and tracing papers was for me very much like touching skin. Essential and comforting to touch the skin. Sometimes the graphite and charcoal and the powders would cling to the linseed oil, drip down to the raw edges. The linseed oil kind of acted like a natural fixative. Sometimes the drips almost looked like tears. While working on these, it was actually very comforting because I thought of touch and the lack of touch with some family members and friends. Touching the littlest human, the tiniest human in our family, his very young, soft skin. Or touching the beautiful, aged skin of my mother, who just recently turned 90. The opening night, a memory that stuck out that was very compelling for me and moving for me was when a young healthcare worker came in, and over the pandemic she'd been working in a nursing home. And she went up and she said, "Regan, this looks like skin, it feels like skin, can I touch?" And I said, "Well, absolutely, touch, do." She put her hand, and then her friend put her hand, and I said, "Oh, I can feel the warmth, and it's not fragile, and it does feel like skin." And she said, she was moved to tears, and she said, "I just wanted the people I cared for to be able to be touched." And she said, we couldn't do that for them, but with the PPE, at least we could just, touch their hand or make them feel that they were important. There was an invention, trust the human condition and creative ability. Necessity is the mother of invention, to create those kinds of plastic, non-permeable surfaces you could probably put their hands through and hug a loved one. Kind of like I suppose plastic underwear does the job, it doesn't feel right. I heard a curator say that once about a certain exhibition, and I thought, well, it's better than nothing, you know, what do you do? Releasing these figures into this generous space was a bit like unpacking my studio. I went from a 10 by 10 small space, and they just kind of came in here and they were allowed to breathe, which was really lovely, I think, for them, and it certainly felt that way to me. Fragments of text on the wall behind you were like unpacking my head, my thought process over the last 3 years. This unpacked my studio, this unpacked my head. There's comforting words. We can be touched by words, and we can touch words. Drawings essentially marks on paper, composed with some attention to tonal variation. The text fragments derived from journal excerpts, thoughts, quotes, memories, some integrated into this talk this afternoon. From a distance, appear only as, and several people in this afternoon artists said, oh, from here it just looks like it's marks on paper. That's just like an exercise in drawing, which is true. The same materials as these drawings, echoed, but in a more structured fashion. They have their own rhythm, they have their own repetition. Close up, though, our symbol systems interpret their meaning differently and linguistically. It was fun to watch people as they negotiated that wall, because normally in Western society we read left to right. Some people were reading up, down, they were reading right to left. And this wall really generated a lot of interesting questions. Before I wrap up, I'm going to invite some of you, if you so choose, to help me bring another voice into this space and read something from the wall. If anybody feels so inclined, step up. It's an invitation, not an obligation.
Precious, balance, precarious, balance, precious, 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 balance, balance, precarious, 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 balance, balance, balance.
Words spoken by a poet in the crowd. Thank you, Sonia. So that was right behind her, directly behind her. Anybody see something that they can read from where they are? You want to come up and read anything? It's kind of lonely being the only one.
Okay, I'll read.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Okay, I like this one. So silence is our listening. Openness. If we want to hear something, we must first give it our silence.
And that was Jane Ash Poitras. She's an Indigenous artist, I think, from Alberta. I think there's a lot of silence, and maybe the cacophony of our daily lives with everybody chatting, and I know I'm the worst offender. I have to remind myself to be a better listener. Silence is something that it can be a comfort. I think it can also, for some people, be overwhelming. Anybody else? We have a third to balance it out. Any takers?
There was one in here.
Go for it, Gail. Walk up to it. Walk up to it. I mean, everybody's sitting, please. Get up. Get up and read the.
But it was so you, Regan.
Oh.
In the meeting.
Okay, go for it.
This is you. With the kneading and the chopping and that repetitive motion. I think that brought you comfort in all of those times. And thought while you were doing it. So I think that to me that was one that really stuck out, and it's comfort.
And Gail, having chosen that one, can attest to the fact that being a long-standing friend of decades, she and another friend and I would Zoom every week. And the Zooms were often 2 hours, so we'd maybe have a glass of wine, we'd chat, catch up. And I'm not one to sit very easily, so I would chop, I would cook. And I don't think I've cooked Thai food since because it takes so long to prepare. It seemed a good use of the time. Anybody else? One more? We're around home. Carry on.
I like the one that I can't read.
Which one is that?
It's smudged, the one in the middle there, and it's kind of, the words started slipping away, and it doesn't really matter. It's just, sometimes it's just letters and dots I can see, and I like the slipping part.
And that one says tread softly through the forest and within. Softly.
Okay, so.
And I like the fact that you liked it without the symbolic meaning
Yeah,
associated.
so-
Like it-
So it's like the wind in the forest, you know, how the branches go with it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you for seeing it as something other than what maybe it appears to be at first. Okay.
I want to
Okay, Kate.
comfort in the back and forth of words. I love that.
Thank you. Oh. So in conclusion, embracing uncertainty while creating this body of work over the last 3 years has really offered new insights into my creative process, into that of others around me as well, whether they're artists, self-proclaimed artists or not. Everybody's a creative, everybody's a maker. And it's really been a wonderful thing with my students. I teach some classes where there are classes at the university, but they're undergrad classes. So there are fine art students, there are engineering students, there are first years to fourth years, there are anthropology students, and we all start where we're at. And the idea being that we all have something inside us that wants to grow and wants to be nurtured, and it's a part of us. And there's something really beautiful that happens when that inner artist is nourished, and it doesn't matter if your art comes out as a runner or if it comes out in many different ways. It's to be honored and it's to be cherished. So Elizabeth Strout, a writer that I read, says, "It's a gift in life that we don't know what awaits us in the future." Thought about that a lot, and I thought I would like to add that it's a gift in life to take the best of what we've learned when working through difficult times, learn from it, let go, turn the page, and move forward with optimism. And getting back to Arundhati Roy's words, I really wonder where we are now in that portal to a new reality. Because I feel that each and every one of us, despite the muck-a-muck in the world news, has the ability to move things forward, however small, however tiny ways, to make bubbles of hope and towards a more compassionate world. So I'd like to thank Exchanges and the CRD for the opportunity to exhibit in this space. And to my partner in life in all things creative, Bruce, who always helps me install. If you see anything kind of structural, architectural, he's getting the credit for that. There have been lots of questions about how this is done. Videographer and performance artist Grace Celez, who kindly helped me on Friday. She's working at a video documentation of this space. And to Efren, for your generosity of time. Efren came after work, and he often goes to art shows just because he likes to support the arts, and he likes to spread the word about how important they are to us all. So thank you, Efren. And thank you all. And I know that you participated a bit, but now that people have spoken some words. Are there any questions, comments, or conversation that you want to continue with?
I was really struck by this wall and the fragmentary nature of the words and all the space between all the words, because it felt to me it was a kind of mapping of that revolution that was happening inside, the confusion of it, trying to find the words for what was going on, the where are we going, and I experienced that in this wall. I just found these very, very evocative, the fragments.
Thank you. Coming from a poet and a writer, those words are really cherished.
Yeah, it really felt like you. I've experienced that feeling of what was happening during the pandemic, that confusion and where are we going? Yeah, that letting go of old paradigms too, and wondering what was going to emerge. And to me, this really evokes all of that. Very powerful.
I'm thinking that drawing on the far wall is part of it. Can you talk about that one?
Sure. That's a really good question, because there's so many good questions. That piece was actually, because my studio is small, it was a backdrop for these figures, really. And so the intent was the wall pieces would have a bit more depth and punch in contrast to these more temporal, ephemeral kinds of translucent hangings. And so when you do something that's site-specific, you never know. I mean, you can have a plan, but you really never know. And it's good not to know, because then you have to think, and you have to think hard about letting go of a preconceived notion. So I put that up, and I thought, oh, that's kind of a nice little space for that drawing. And it has a memory of a linseed that had dripped down from these drawings on it. And then I just left it for a while, and then kind of just wanted to sort of have these drawings speak to one another, and then I put a few over there, and I tried them. They didn't work. They didn't work. The drawing said, I don't need the figures, and the space said, you don't need the figures. So behind the work here as well, there is an underlying drawing that is not visible really in its entirety, but it was on the wall of the studio also, and it's been on the wall for a while. And I like the way that it kind of added a different dimension to those hanging figures. And getting back to your question about that particular drawing, there were some little children, little people, little humans that were in here yesterday racing around, and their mom was an art student at Camosun, and she was with a friend. And so it's really great to watch little people, engage in things, because it's just so raw and fresh and refreshing. So they walked up and were looking at that piece a lot. And the mother said, what do you see? He said, what do you see in that? Why are you looking at it so much? And he said, well, I see the face. Don't you see the face? And the little sister's standing beside, I don't see a face. And the cookies were more interesting than the work. And so she said, show me the face. And we looked and looked. And sure enough, he saw kind of a profile here and an eye there. And he said, the face is there. Why can't you see it? And she said, no. And then the mom was saying, well, what do you see in it? If you don't, I said, it's okay if you don't see the face. He sees a face. You don't have to see a face. What do you see? And she said she saw a lollipop, and she saw something else in it. So, through the eyes of a child, and how profound. And I can't not see the face when I look at this now. I mean, it's funny. I've looked at that drawing for years, and I've never seen a face. So, thank you for the question. And then I thought, does it really belong? Because it is different. And then I thought, well, it does belong because it's got the memory of the linseed oil. So from a material point perspective, it didn't have to. It just worked visually. I think it worked. And other people have been drawn to it. So thanks for the question. Yes.
Could you talk just a little bit about the, sort of being able to see the figures from both sides?
Okay. Sure. You mean when you walk through it?
Yeah, and that transparency idea, like what appealed to you about that?
About being able to walk from both sides?
Yeah, and see them in reverse. Well, not really in reverse, I guess.
Some are reversed and others not.
Yeah.
What I particularly envisioned with the way that these were hung, because it's interactive, and I've done a few interactive installations before where people were more confined to a space. I wanted people to somehow be able to move through this. I also wanted them, as they moved, to be a bit visible. Like if somebody's walking through here and then somebody's here, the participants in this exhibition became part of the conversation of the figures, different iterations, like 3D iterations of, and I encourage people when they were walking through to feel free to talk. I said, it's, you know, there might be places where you get charcoal, but really the linseed oil is a very gentle, kind of natural way to fix the charcoal. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay. And it's a different thing when you float through the space than when you're affixed to a wall. You know, the wall holds you captive, the text holds you captive, that holds you captive. This, as a participant in the installation, allows you agency to move through it and to somehow interact with it, which adds a different dynamic. And to me, sitting and watching people walk through it was a real joy, because I never, it changed all the time.
I really feel, yeah, for sure that they breathe in this space. And having I feel like I've lived with them across the hall from me for over 2 years. And then never at one time when you finally hung them, and our heating system would start out.
Yes.
And it would make them all move.
Yes.
Right? And they would kind of rattle and crinkle. Often I'm there totally by myself. So they become kind of ghost-like.
Laura would say, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's what spooky, that's what Royden said, yeah.
Yeah, well, Laura would
They're
say,
also comforting.
Laura would say, walk by, are you still doing those fingers? What are you going to do with those fingers when you get, I don't know.
I was starting to call them your COVID people.
I COVID people. Are you still doing your COVID people? I said, I guess I am, Laura. I don't know why I'm doing them. I'm just doing them.
Well, they became your community, sort of. Like that.
They did, and they became, I didn't attach any personality or one individual, but as I said, I've been thinking about people that were, a lot of people were struggling, or there were kind of joyful moments, and I just thought of different people specifically, as I was doing them, and then I'd go on and I'd work at something else, some clay, or I'd work at these hanging lanterns. This has really been 2.5 years. So they're not going to be in the studio, Laura, anymore. I think it's time to take a break.
Are you back and forth with words and with the figures, or does one happen?
Okay, that's a great question, because, yes, I know, I wasn't really. I was in my head. But when I ran out of space and I was I wasn't losing interest in these, but I think we'd kind of come to a different point in our relationship, these figures and I. And so, the good thing about applying for an exhibition is you really have to collect your thoughts. And so it was a year ago that I applied for this exhibition. So when you have to do a proposal and a statement, it's a good exercise. Whether you are accepted or rejected, it's still a good exercise. So when I knew I was going to be giving a talk, I thought, I have notes everywhere. People that I live with will attest to that. But there's, in that chaos, an order for me. And so how do I capture that? I just, riding a bike, I'll get this stream of consciousness going through my head and think, I'm going to lose it. I can't stop on my phone and write it in. Don't have a post-it. So what is going to stick? I have to try to conscious what's going to stick when I get home. I have to write it down. So I had these bits of text on my phone, as I said, on all these things. And I just started to play. Again, I had no idea, no intention, but I just had some tracing paper and I had a charcoal pencil. And I thought, what would happen if I just started to put some of these words, because I had to think about what I was going to say, and what was it that resonated with me, and it just did become very much, Cynthia, this blur of like random phrases, and sometimes when I'm reading, if I'm reading on my e-reader, or if I'm reading on my phone, my e-reader was down, so I was reading on my phone, but the great thing is if I came across a passage, I just take a screen capture of it, right, so that I could then put it back and remember it. This came in the last 2 months of the 2.5 years, because it was almost like, as I said, this unpacked my studio, this unpacked my head. But the thing is, I started to have so much fun doing it. It was like eating popcorn and peanuts, because I just kept rattling off, and I think, okay, which one will I do today? Oh, I think I've already done that one, but I could do it differently, because obviously, so it's that repetitive thing too. And, you know, it's journaling, and then it happened, and then I thought, oh, why didn't, so this is done, I think, but probably this is a stepping stone to something new that I'm going to continue to explore. I don't know how. It's good that I don't know how, because then it'll be more authentic, I feel. Thank you, that's a great question, because, yes, that was more recent, fresh. But it was always embedded here, it's just that it wasn't visible. And it is still a blur, isn't it? The last 2.5, 3 years, it is all kind of still a blur.
Yeah.
And we have convenient memories. Why would women ever have more than one child? Oh, it's painful. You get some reward. I don't know if the pain of the last few years has reaped as many rewards, but yeah. Thank you, really thank you for your presence and for your input and your commentary and patience, and lots of cookies and chocolate, a cup of tea or a glass of water. Didn't bring you beer, but yeah, it's like a cup of excuse went by about an hour, a glass of wine. I don't expect